So in the early 1970s, the General Conference put together a committee, a task force to look at what the intersection should look like between Adventism and psychology. But the history of Adventism, especially with popular psychology, goes back much earlier. For example, there's this camp meeting in 1893 where Ellen White's there and some folks show up and they say, hey, have you heard about this idea of phrenology? We think this is a really great idea for Adventism. And they make some suggestions that aren't really fitting within Adventism or within what we would have called popular psychology of the time. And Ellen White actually scraps her Sabbath morning sermon to talk about the dangers of running after pop psychology without thinking about the intersection of Adventism and psychology. And so there's kind of this long history of thinking carefully, especially about the popularized version of psychology, how it relates to Adventism. I think there's two ways that it's helped. So one way is that we have some people within the Adventist Church who have been pretty influential. They've written books, and they happen to be psychologists, and so they bring some of those psychology ideas in. So for example, Donna Habenik, who was a psychologist here at Andrews, wrote a book called How to Help Your Child Really Love Jesus, which is given to parents at dedication ceremonies and things like that, still given out. And so a lot of ideas from developmental psychology are embedded into the Adventist ideas in that book. Another way is that the General Conference funds research. So I do some of this research. I'm a principal investigator on the Global Church Member Survey Project. And so there we have psychologists working to help the church understand why people believe what they believe, why they behave the way they behave, and how to understand what the Adventist Church is doing as a whole. And so we have some influence of psychology there in helping the church meet its strategic plans and then plan for the next round, the next 5-year cycle of planning. We are probably about where we were in Ellen White preached her sermon in 1893. So the trouble back then was that Adventists were going after popularized versions of psychology without checking to see if that stacked up to either what our aims and goals are within Adventism, or if it actually stacked up to the way human beings are at all. I've made the same arguments within the last 10 years that there's kind of a danger because there's a lot of popularized psychology, right? You see it in publications that are aimed at people in the world of business. You see sometimes pastors talking about popularized ideas in psychology that they find on the internet or that they see on media. Scott Lilienfeld once estimated that in the self-help section of most bookstores, 90 to 95% of that content has never been vetted. It sounds like psychology, but it isn't. And so I think we're in a place where, the 1974 report said we really need to do a better job of thinking about what this intersection means. And unfortunately, I think in the last 40, 50 years, we haven't really moved that far as a group. I think individuals like schools, departments of psychology have done a good job of working this out. But I think that as an Adventist community, there's still a lot of work to do. One piece of my research that people should know about. So I think, all right, let me give you two pieces. So one piece is a psychology of religion piece, and the other piece is not. So the psychology of religion piece would be my work on what we were calling Sabbath keeping internalization at the time, but now I'm actually thinking is better to think of as Sabbath keeping well-being. So I developed a scale along with several students that measures the degree to which people experience the Sabbath as a delight or whether people experience the Sabbath as a disruption. And that seems to be associated with people's overall well-being. It seems to be associated with how engaged people are on Sabbath. It seems to actually predict a number of really helpful kind of things to think about in terms of how the spiritual life of your church is going. So it's actually a tool that a pastor could use in a church where you have people fill it out anonymously, like on a cell phone in church, and that would give you some immediate data that you could turn around and interpret for thinking about how Sabbath is going for your church, which I think would be like a really easy thing to think about and to do some things about for a pastor. So I think that would be a cool thing for pastors to know about. The part that isn't psych of religion but could be applied there has to do with some research I did on research method students. So one idea that people had about research method students is that, well, research method students had a lot of grit. Grit was what helped you survive research methods. But what I found out was that it's not grit as much as it is identity. So people who saw themselves as researchers, they said, yeah, I'm going to be a researcher, thrived in research methods classes. And people who said, that's just not who I am, really struggled. If you didn't see yourself as a researcher, if you had a ton of grit, you still struggled with the class. And so that changes how you think about that class, because your job then as a teacher isn't just to kind of promote the grit of students, it's to help students see themselves as researchers, right? And if identity is that important in research methods, what that makes me think is that you might want to look for identity in other places, including in religion, right? So what is it that makes people want to stay in the church? Maybe it has more to do with helping them develop an identity than it does about helping them develop self-control to behave appropriately.